Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. After 14 months, Ruben Amorim has been relieved of his duties at Manchester United. So, where did it all go wrong? And where do INEOS turn to next? All right, joining us now, we've got the man that broke the story on the sacking of Ruben Amorim, David Ornstein. We've also got Mark Critchley, who was at Ellen Road, and Oli Kay, our senior football writer as well. So, Ruben Amorim's time at Manchester United is over after just 14 months. The end came after an extraordinary outburst when Manchester United drew with Leeds United. Let's have a listen to what he said.
I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach of Manchester United. And that is clear. I know that my name is not Tuchel, is not Conte, is not Mourinho, but I'm the manager of Manchester United. And it's going to be like this for 18 months or when the board decided to change. I'm not going to quit. I will do my job until other guy is coming here to replace me. If people cannot handle the Gary Nevilles and the criticisms of everything, we need to change the club. I came here to be the manager of Manchester United, not to be the coach. And every department, the scouting department, the sport director needs to do their job. I will do mine for 18 months and then we move on.
Yeah, David, some really strong words there from Ruben Amorim. Why did Manchester United act so promptly following that outburst?
Well, I think they probably felt they were left with no choice, that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, ultimately. And the more we're starting to hear about this situation, the more we learn that the seeds were sown a little bit earlier. I started to hear rumblings in and amongst our reporting on Thursday about Enzo Maresca leaving Chelsea. Completely unrelated, nothing to do with Maresca and Man United. People saying to me, you need to have your eyes on Ruben Amorim and Manchester United. It's coming towards an end there. And I didn't really know how to take that. But within 24 hours, Amorim had given his news conference ahead of the Leeds game. And he had a face like thunder. He didn't want to speak about the formation, which he's spoken about so much in the past. He said they wouldn't be doing any January business. It felt like something had happened prior to that news conference, and we now learn that there was an explosion of sorts, a disagreement between him and Jason Wilcox, the sporting director, over all manner of topics. I'm sure we'll find out more as the days go on. And that kind of laid the foundations for what we saw post-Leeds. And I think when you speak like he did at Elland Road about your superiors, your employers, about your job and your club, especially one of this magnitude, it tends, as we saw in the case of Maresca at Chelsea, to only end one way. Though when you speak to people with a bit of knowledge of it, they kind of make you feel that Man United took that action because Maresca's feelings and behaviour almost forced them to do so. So it's quite a messy situation, and one that when you reflect on it, his comments, not only now, but over the months, and there have been a number of notable outbursts, you kind of feel that it's maybe not entirely a surprise. And Man United find themselves in this unwanted position yet again. I think that's 10 managers, including interim, since Sir Alex Ferguson departed in 2013, and all eyes will be on what they do next.
Yeah, Critch, you were at that press conference. Listening to that, I'm just scratching my head thinking, goodness me, how long has this guy got left? Did it feel like the point of no return from your point of view?
Yes, in a word. It was incendiary. It was pretty extraordinary. I've sat through some, I don't know whether you call it an outburst or a rant or a power play or whatever you want to call it. I've sat through a few in my time covering United. That was the one that felt like it would have the most dramatic and immediate consequences of any of those that I've sat through. There's a group of journalists we kind of gathered around at the end, and we're trying to interpret exactly what he meant, break down each line of it, but then ultimately come to the decision of, well, what did it mean for his future and what would be the consequences? And we've seen the consequences today. I think that it's very rare for a manager to speak so openly and directly against their own superiors within the club and to keep their job. We've seen an example of that recently with Enzo Maresca, and now we've got another one. There's plenty more through the history of English football and the Premier League, etc. I think the most pointed part was really where he essentially does everything except name the sporting director, the director of football at Manchester United, Jason Wilcox. He also referenced the scouting department, which is headed up by Christopher Favell, and there'd been reports over the weekend about some sort of tension there. It was a follow-up really from his press conferences pre-match on Friday, which I was attending as well, where his mood was like, and his demeanour was like nothing I've ever seen from Ruben Amorim. Usually, no matter what the result has been, you can trust that there'll be a little bit of levity, perhaps a joke. He can be quite self-deprecating at times. He tries to disarm journalists. We've seen that even after results like Grimsby or the Everton game, or there's all manner of poor results that there have been during his time at the club. But on Friday, he looked flat. He looked defeated. He looked like he was a kind of shadow of the coach that he had been in the role, and that really set people's antennas going. It set the hair running on what exactly was going on. Yesterday, after the Leeds game, he could just have played a sort of straight bat as he basically did on Friday, but it was always very unlikely that he was going to do that, because I think we've seen how he operates. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He speaks directly, he speaks openly, he's honest sometimes to a fault. If he feels something, he will often tell you. And it came out yesterday in, again, one of the more extraordinary exchanges that I've seen in the press conference, one of the most extraordinary outbursts, if I want to use that word, that I've seen from a manager. And ultimately, he's paid for it with his job, and I don't think that's a particular surprise.
Ollie, let me throw some stats at you here. Ruben Amorim had the lowest win ratio of any permanent Manchester United manager in the Premier League, and that was 32%. He averaged 1.24 points per game. His longest winning streak was just 3 games. Only Spurs, West Ham and Wolves accumulated fewer points than Amorim's United. Look, from your perspective, are there any complaints that he was sacked?
I don't think it's worked from day one. Really, the performances and results over the piece have been really poor. It's basically one win in 3 in the Premier League. That's nowhere near good enough. It's barely near good enough for any team. Never mind for Manchester United. But what Amorim can say in his defence is that they're 6th in the Premier League. They're not far from Liverpool in 4th. There is another side to this, and I will acknowledge that. But their performances and results this season have been better. It's just that the improvement has been fairly meagre in terms of the performances and results. What I find fascinating is that the sort of word, the official word out of Manchester United this morning has been, look, this isn't to do with power struggles, this isn't to do with personality clashes, this is all to do with the results not being good enough. Yet I spoke to somebody at Manchester United about a month ago, and they said, yeah, look, it's going okay. We look at the XG, we look at the data, the performances aren't bad. We're if we'd won this game, we'd be 4th, which has pretty much been the case all season. There was also an expectation at that point that with Ahmad and Mazraoui and Mbeumo going away for AFCON, that the Christmas period might be a bit rocky. So why has that suddenly been forgotten? And I think the obvious answer to that is that he's been challenging, perhaps undermining the authority of those above him, and that seems to have. It doesn't seem to have been a performance taken purely on the basis of meandering, slow, fairly underwhelming progress over his tenure. It seems to be a performance taken in the light of disagreements behind the scenes and a reframing, I think, of his overall record. Which, look, again, I don't think is good enough, but I think Manchester United felt it was good enough, or just about good enough, until perhaps a few weeks ago when things started to change behind the scenes.
David, I want to talk about the director of football, Jason Wilcox, and if this has led fundamentally to a breakdown between the relationship between Amorim and Wilcox. And is it just a 4-4-3 or the 4-3-4-3 or 4-3-3 formation that's the issue here?
Listen, everything we hear suggests that Wilcox had been supportive of Amorim throughout his time at the club, and as sporting director, you would certainly hope so. But naturally, there are going to be some tough conversations and disagreements. And clearly, Amorim, who joined United at the age of 39, it was relatively inexperienced, emotional, hadn't worked as a manager outside of Portugal, and would have needed managing. Wilcox himself was technical director at the time. It got upgraded to sporting director after the departure of Dan Ashworth. He had only worked in that role briefly at Southampton, director of football, I think he was there. And prior, he was at Manchester City as academy director, and before that, a youth coach. So this has been a rapid ascent for Wilcox, and Ashworth is a different topic altogether, but he was vastly experienced in this sort of role. And I think there is already a lot of discussion about the wisdom of his departure. But we didn't hear about fundamental breakdowns during much of the 14 months, but clearly in more recent times, there have been suggestions of tensions. I don't think it would have only been about a formation. I think there would have been many factors, certainly from the dialogue I have had around this news, whether it be formation, whether it be recruitment in the market, whether it be visions and perception on promises and what has been kept, what hasn't, where things are going. And evidently Friday was a bad day in this all, and potentially seminal. And then sort of Sunday's comments tipped it over the edge. But there's a collective there. There's also Christopher Vivell, who's heading up the recruitment. There's Omar Barada as chief executive, and then above that there is Sir Jim Ratcliffe, INEOS, the board. But clearly a lot of emphasis will be placed on that relationship with Wilcox, and understandably so. And perhaps even further judgment, a more significant judgment, will be on how Wilcox leads United forward now in the decision, whether it's over an interim coach if somebody else comes in after Darren Fletcher takes the initial matches, and then of course the permanent successor. And we know with sporting directors, as Eddie Howe famously said before, when Dan Ashworth was in the process of leaving Newcastle and he was asked in the news conference, how do you think he's done? Eddie Howe said a sporting director is judged over years, not over months. And that's the only amount of time Dan Ashworth's been here. And it's the same with Jason Wilcox. He really has been there for a year. Lots of people speak very highly of him from his work in the game so far, especially at Manchester City. But he's been elevated into an extraordinary position very early, and so it will take more time for us to form judgments. And perhaps with hindsight, you can reflect, and Man United might, that you had two relatively fresh people into such key positions at such a massive club and organisation that it was too much too soon, and you need a more experienced person leading that sporting operation. But that is clearly, by the way that Man United are backing Jason Wilcox, that could become him in the time ahead. And if they are backing him, it will have to be him. But they will have to put some very deep thought into this new head coach and how that relationship can ultimately be healthier going forward than this one ended, because clearly not ideal.
Yeah, before you go, just a quick one. Does this have any impact on potential transfers? I mean, January is here. I mean, there are players on the market, and Manchester United do need to bolster this squad in many respects as well. Or can they even do any business with so much going on?
Well, we're on the 5th of January, so a lot can change in the weeks ahead. The initial word I'm getting from conversations I've had is that no notable business is expected to be done at this point in time. Don't hold me to that, because you never know in this industry. Obviously, Man United were in the mix for Antoine Semenyo, who is on course to join Manchester City. that would say to many people that there's budget there. It's a £65 million release clause. Maybe Ruben Amorim was saying, well, if we're not getting him, who are we getting? That was always explained to me as being a market opportunity for that player, who we know that Man United liked because they explored it last summer and the price was deemed to be too high. They don't necessarily then allocate those resources to an alternative signing. And maybe that position is not even at the top of their agenda, because the central midfield area is the key focus as we understand it. And whether that's now or more likely in the summer, I think you'll see that addressed. And there are other areas of the team that you might point towards before you look for another wide attacker if you're in our position. So Semenyo did seem a unique case. And right now, I don't know of them pivoting to something else. I think they need to get their head in gear around the coaching situation and what resources they've got at their disposal. They'll be having players coming back from AFCON, players coming back from injury, like Bruno Fernandes and Kobbie Mainoo. It'll be very interesting to see how things shape up with Mainoo now, because he was clearly out of favour under Ruben Amorim. Will he play a bigger role going forward and therefore stay at the club? And that could bolster that midfield department, because it was like not having him really, because he was playing so little. And yeah, like I don't know. Theoretically, if players depart, like say Joshua Zirkzee, then maybe there's scope to bring somebody in. There have been whispers around a midfield loan and that sort of thing, but at the time of recording this, I'm not expecting January to be a busy month of transfer activity for Man United. However, naturally, and now even more so with a new head coach set to be appointed at some stage, you would expect the summer to be extremely significant for Manchester United in the market, and therefore their short and longer term future.
Okay, David, I've already seen the Kobbie Mainoo is free memes flying around social media, so really appreciate your chat on that, and appreciate you joining us as well.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.
Ollie, David mentioned that Darren Fletcher is in interim charge with a look at a long-term successor coming in the summer. But where do they go next? Because there's been a whole heap of managers that have taken the helm at Manchester United and haven't done that well.
Oh, I just can't think, because I don't know what the vision is. I don't know what the plan is. You can sometimes look at a club and think, well, we know what type of manager they want, and we know what type of manager will fit into what they want. And I don't know what Manchester United want. I'm absolutely, flummoxed by what Manchester United want in terms of the hierarchy. And in terms of the ownership, the board, etc. So I don't know. If you go back 2 months, 3 months, I think everybody would have said, well, it's got to be Glasner, isn't it? It's got to be Iraola. But those two have results at Palace and Bournemouth have tailed off, and that seems, in the bizarre nature of the football industry, people sort of lose interest based on a bad sort of 4 or 5 weeks or so. You go back to the summer of 2024, and who were the managers they were looking at? Who were the others? De Zerbi, Thomas Frank, remind me, Gretsch, Marco Silva. There was interest in, and it's, and then it came to the vacancy a few months later, and it was suddenly a one-horse race for Amorim. It's bizarre how football works. It's bizarre how Manchester United have worked in these past few years. So I wouldn't know at all. You might look at the current emphasis on the likelihood of an interim appointment and think, well, does that hint towards somebody who might become available at the end of the season, maybe after the World Cup? Did it, look at all the managers there. There's Thomas Tuchel with England. There's Julian Nagelsmann with Germany. There's Carlo Ancelotti with Brazil. Pochettino with USA. Will they be thinking of somebody who's going to be on World Cup duty? I just don't know. I don't know what they want. I think they sort of, I don't think there's a clear enough vision or a sufficiently obvious vision or strategy to be able to say this is the guy who will fit Manchester United's structure. I think yet again they're going to be moulding their structure to fit whoever they end up bringing in.
Yeah, Ollie's scratching his head, Critch. Will post-World Cup provide a bit more clarity as to who's available to make a much more informed decision?
It could, and I think the options that will be available at that time are perhaps a little bit more qualified. I think Amorim might have even name-dropped a couple of them in his press conference yesterday. But I guess the issue with that is timing, isn't it? Because if the World Cup finishes in the middle of July, is that really ideal for a new permanent head coach to be coming in at that point when you'd expect United to be honest, already be on the pre-season tour by that point? Now, we have seen it before. It happened in 2014 with Louis van Gaal. Went all the way to the semi-finals of the 2014 World Cup and then started work at United. So I wouldn't rule out that sort of possibility. And it might be, as I say, that the coaches of the calibre that you would perhaps expect to be in the running for this job are only really available then. I do think we've also seen that United, certainly in the summer transfer business at least, we're taking a bit more of a bent towards Premier League proven. Does that apply to coaches as well? If so, then that does bring, I think, Glasner and Iraola to the table. I know, as Ollie mentioned, the results have tailed off recently, but I think there's still a level of admiration there for the job that they've done. So it's interesting, but I think I remember when Ten Hag was dismissed, we did a pod almost as soon as that happened, I think, and jumped straight on when it was still a very fluid situation. And I was sort of making the argument at the time that I think it's probably the right moment to get an interim, have them till the end of the season, treat it as a bit of not a write-off as such, but take that time to decide properly on who you want. And it sounds like that is more likely. I mean, it's a fluid situation right now, but it sounds like that's more likely the approach that United will take. And I think that's right. And I think that's a lesson that they've perhaps learned from Amorim. He always said that he didn't want to join in the middle of the season. Even this year, when the results have been okay and certainly an improvement on last year, and people are arguing about they're only this far off Champions League, etc., I think the shadow of last season has hung over this one particularly, and you've been able to point to his record in terms of all competitions, all the games that he's managed. It isn't great, and that dates all the way back to last season when things weren't great. I don't think they'll want that sort of hangover to be over a manager again. I think it'd be sensible to avoid that, and so I wonder if that's the approach that they'll take. But fundamentally, I think waiting until the summer also gives you a better pick and a better selection of permanent head coaches going forward. And so that makes it the more sensible option.
I have to quickly, before we go, throw Maresca's name into the ring, Critch, as an option, especially with the relationship with Wilcox and Barada at City Football Group. What are your thoughts on that potential?
I think that I would not want to rule anything out at this point, at this early stage. So keep options open. If the approach and if the plan is to appoint permanently in the summer, then to me, just logically, without any sort of information, that would suggest that Maresca isn't top of the shortlist because he's available right now. Now, he's not employed right now. We don't know, or I don't know the circumstances of his departure from Chelsea, whether there's some gardening leave restrictions, maybe they'd have to wait anyway. So maybe he's still a candidate for the summer and maybe it's not possible right now. But I think if we take as read that perhaps he is available and United are still waiting for the summer, that would suggest that he's not top of the list at this stage. But like I say, I don't think we can rule anything out. It's a developing situation, as I keep repeating, and we'll see what names emerge over the coming days.
Yeah, you just turned into David Ornstein very briefly there. I like it. Just keep it sweet.
I learned from the master. What can I say?
Learn from the master, exactly. All right, gents, let's leave it there. Critch, Oli, appreciate your time. And also thank you guys for joining us as well. Make sure you keep across the Athletic for further developments on this, and there will be more. We'll catch you soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.